there's something still unspoken that wants
Please
to
do.
be, you know, and this has to do with the gap, with the minding of the gap, very much. And it is I think also a good answer to the query that came from Richard of how do I think in the spheres? And I want to shift our focus a little, because for so far we've mostly been looking into the four eyes, which is great. It's a good place to start. Absolutely, because it is where space-time begins anew. You have four spheres like these drawn together, and they create their little bit of insideness and outsideness. And with these four spheres, we do have a gap between them, right? And I'm just gonna not scare away the cat. Let's take just a quick look at this four eyes. You see, it is different from this, both in material and technique, but also something else about it is different. And that is what I'm going to go into next time more deeply, which is the interval and the frequency, because this is a four eyes of not just these four, but they would actually be drawn around, oh no, that's going too deep into it. But when we add another layer to this, so another set of, in this case, on the next layer, it would be 6 spheres, also in a triangle, then we get out the structure here, which is the true frequency of the four eyes. And we don't need to go into all of that in detail, but I want to draw your attention to the fact that where this is 4 spheres drawn together, this can be read as four eyes drawn together, right? And where in here, there's a gap between them, there's a gap between these 4 eyes too, and that's the 8 eyes, right? And maybe you recall how the other time in the last session, I brought together 2 triangles and got, so 1 eye plus 1 eye, and what came out of them was 4 eyes. If I take 2 4 eyes, 1 4 eyes and 1, they combine to make an 8 eyes, right? This is just twice as many members as this, but it is 4 times the volume. And for me, this 8 eyes is the most versatile and useful of all shapes. It's the most balanced of all spheres, if you ask me. And I've seen a couple. And it is also, to my mind, the most beautiful embodiment of the Tao. And there's one model in particular that I think shows that, which is this I showed you earlier, where if we just counted the paper triangles, that's 4 of them, right? So I could put them together as a 4 eyes. But in this case, I've put them together, and this is also just a tensegrity, just as all the others. There's a string running around the triangles here, connecting the thing up. And you see how by connecting them not finger by finger to have a 4 eyes, but actually corner to corner, this creates an 8 eyes, where it's just as much there as there isn't. So it's yin and yang as one, right? It is also why I think it is reasonable to call this eightfold path, path of Buddha, call it the dance of the Tao, because it at its heart, at its center, is the 8 eyes also. And it is the thing we can get when we recombine our minds, letting go of the box and allowing for this. Because I really would love to invite you to make one of these, grow one of these. I've made a video, and I'll put the link to that video again into the meetup session somewhere, so you can see it. It shows at length what this model can do and how it is created. But what I only learned by giving it to someone else not by what I had in mind when I made it, was that this model here, which is completely collapsible, it can be folded all the way down into a bundle without any problem. I gave it to a friend, or rather she wanted to take it, and I gave it to her. And I watched her minding a phone call and playing with this on her lap. And I saw her trying to, she didn't know that she could put the buttons together, but she was trying to hold this in a very familiar shape that I didn't think of when I made this, right? I really wasn't even aware that it could do this. In hindsight, it's completely clear that it can, because it's a dozen fingers and they're free to connect in one way or another. But now that I've connected these up, here is our box, right? And I mean, learning how to make this one does not necessarily teach one how to make all of them, but to have one is incredibly fun and useful if you ever want to explain this stuff to somebody, because you get a model that allows you to transform the cube into the eye, 4 eyes, and a pair of 4 eyes is in there too. And there is the quad rays that will come to be talked about more with Kirby. And all of those it can easily do while not really being able to be a box. And you see, this is the box that I had to cut short to make it hold. Or what I did yesterday was to make one in this size, but to get that, I had to cut so many members that would allow me to have grown that in its stead, which would have been way bigger. So here is to wrap that all up. If we want to take the shortcut out of the box mind and have a place to begin with whenever we need something to make sense, whenever we want to grow something, a piece of furniture or a container for something, whatever it is, I think the most reasonable place to begin with is the 8 eyes. It's probably the most overlooked of all shapes in the history of our species, but I think it's got the greatest of all potentials in terms of, being the most balanced point of departure to go any which way within all of these options and possibilities. But to start there is to begin not actually just with the 4 eyes as the beginning of the whole, but begin with the heart of the whole, begin with the balance, the center, the actual gap, the gap in between, And just to point this last thing out, I spoke earlier about universe being a fractal, and this is showing that. And here, just to make that more clear, this structure is also a 4 eyes. But not by now you can look at it and see this is a 4 eyes out of 8 eyes. Mm-hmm. So where this was a 4 eyes out of spheres, I've gone up a few levels of complexity. Actually, this is within this here, the 3 frequency 4 eyes has this in it. Mm-hmm. And then we have that fractal already again, and this is to say we are as fluid as the river of reality to shift easily between all of these foci, loci, these places where we hold on to something and say, let's mind this one, because then we can see how it relates to all the rest. And then we can grow the intervalues of life and grow the whole, because there's no end to that.